I'm ashore, he reported. If I find anything interesting, I'll let you know right away. Good luck. Stay sharp, answered Timurik. I will, promised Veselov that he didn't often get the chance to be out in nature. Even on oxygen worlds, like the majority of people, Sonya lived in cities, sometimes above ground, sometimes below. Sometimes these were massive megacities, sometimes a network of small towns where the houses were no more than 2 stories tall. But there was always a road nearby, always thousands of people around, and over there, a flyer station where you could rent a ride and be at the nearest spaceport in half an hour. In short, most people of Earth's dominant civilization were used to neatly trimmed trees and manicured lawns, not to forests full of deadfall, crawling with wild beasts, where the last human footprint had never been. And now Sonya Veseloy, a pathfinder, found himself in exactly such a place. Of course, that was part of the job. Explorers often roamed through untamed planets, but in his 12 raids, Sonya had encountered nothing but empty sweeps so far. Still, he had done plenty of simulated landings on training runs, so he was ready for this. The river, most likely still unnamed, curved gently at the landing site of the Schuster, forming a wide bay full of shallows. It was on one of these that the raider had run aground. The bay gave way to a marshy lowland, which slowly merged into a lush, green meadow, and beyond that began a forest. Or perhaps the meadow was reclaiming the forest, or vice versa. It was hard to say. Small groves dotted the landscape, blurring the boundary between the two. The land gently sloped upward from the river, rising toward a distant highland visible through the haze. Grunting, Sonya pulled himself out of the swamp onto solid ground. The muck gave way to firm soil, no more puddles underfoot. There was wildlife everywhere. A herd of deer, local analogs, obviously, grazed at the edge of the forest. Tiny rodents scurried through the grass, falling silent when Sonya approached. A bird of prey circled above the field, then suddenly dove like a stone. Moments later, it rose again, clutching its kill, and flew off toward the forest, beating its wings heavily. Somewhere in the woods, an unseen beast let out a long call. Another answered from deeper within. Rationally speaking, there was no point trying to find cover in the open field. What kind of cover could a field possibly offer? And the surrounding terrain wasn't exactly promising for caves either. So Sonya decided to head into the forest. He wasn't worried about getting lost. He could always call the raider to activate a beacon, and his suit was packed with enough sensors to map the whole area. At any moment, he could bring up a holo map showing a 3D model of the terrain or a flat topographic map with a red dot, himself, and a blue dot back at the Schuster stuck in the riverbank. Logic suggested he should look for an animal trail leading to the water. It was a river, after all. Though in rainforests, a river might not be the only or even primary source of water. But these woods didn't seem especially damp. Beneath the trees in a couple of groves, the ground was dry, just fallen leaves and branches, no puddles that he didn't find any trail. So Sonya picked a direction at random and started deeper into the jungle. He wandered for quite a while, pushing through tangled undergrowth and getting snagged in the brush. Nothing useful turned up. He was just wasting time. When it finally occurred to him to start heading back, he stumbled upon. He didn't even have a word for IT. IT sat there, nestled between 2 trees on the slope of a small hill. The thing most closely resembled the entrance to a tiny underground house. A neat little porch, a door, a pitched roof over the top. Only the entire structure was knee-high at best. A woodland gnome's residence. Sonya touched the roof. It felt like plastic. Looking closer, he spotted a logo in the corner, Ophelia Builderer, Ltd., and a stylized little house. That made him feel a bit better. At least it was human-made. But why so tiny? He examined the door. It was locked with a standard electronic mechanism. Same kind you'd find anywhere, on any planet, any starship. What the hell? Thought Sonya, astonished. A wild, untouched frontier, and here I am, barely an hour and a half in, and I've already found something artificial? Or maybe this place isn't as wild as it looks? He called the raider and reported the find. The foreman didn't hesitate. Open it, Timuric ordered. If it's a usable shelter, we'll have an easier time negotiating with human owners than with the hunters after us. Sonya drew his laser. No time to fuss with the lock. A thin red beam lanced through the plastic door. He carefully traced a circle around the locking mechanism. Then he gave the door a hard kick. The cutout chunk, lock and all, dropped inside. With a clatter, "Welcome home," Sonya muttered and hesitantly grabbed the handle. Nope. It wasn't a home at all. Just a tiny, windowless bunker, about a cubic meter in volume. Along the side and back walls ran narrow shelves, packed with backpacks. More packs were stacked beneath them. For the next 5 minutes, Sonya rifled through the gear while narrating his findings to the team back on the raider. He found food rations, weapons, ammo, survival gear, a radio, a top-tier survival kit for someone planning to rough it off-grid. Most of the equipment was made in Earth-dominant worlds. "Well, I'll be," the foreman muttered. "Vajia, check the archive. Any settlements nearby?" Luckily, there was something in the raider's onboard database. Connecting to the global network directly was too risky. Any signal would be triangulated in no time by the hunters. "All clear, Sonya," the deputy team leader reported with some relief, barely a minute later. "The only inhabited place in this part of the continent is the exotic tour base camp. It's about 100 kilometers east-southeast. You've stumbled upon one of their reserve depots. So what do I do now?" Sonya asked, just in case, though inwardly he thought, "Guess I was wrong about the river. It's definitely not nameless." "Stuff like this isn't left lying around," Timuric replied curtly. "No telling how long we'll have to hide in the jungle. And the raider's gonna have to be ditched soon anyway. They'll find it right away. So, take everything." "Everything?" Sonya was stunned. "There's over a ton of stuff here. More like 2 tons, most likely," the foreman said coolly. "But every pack has a grav compensator. Check it." Sonya did. "You're right. I get the idea, Timuric. So, where am I dragging all this? Back to the raider?" Shaliko and Pluznik conferred for a while. Sonya could only hear muffled voices. "No," the foreman finally responded. "Keep moving. Find a spot. Once you do, contact us. You okay with sleeping rough?" "What's there to be afraid of?" Sonya shrugged. "As long as we don't get unexpected visitors. I'll manage." "Attaboy," Pluznik encouraged him. "And be careful out there, got it?" "Got it," Sonya sighed, trying to imagine the kind of place he was supposed to find. What would it even look like? A cave? No caves around here. No mountains. Either. Maybe a maintenance hut from Exotic Tour? No, that's the first thing any bounty hunter would check. "Think, Sonya, think." He thought as he began dragging the backpacks out of the depot. For a while, he busied himself tying them together with a long speckled cord, threading it through loops whose purpose he didn't know, and fastening them with a simple knot known in textbooks as Alaska, and among cadets and scavengers as a figure 8. The grav compensators took the most time. They were all non-standard models and labeled in a language Sonya didn't recognize. Probably New Dutch. There weren't even any pictograms, so he had to do some trial flying. Thankfully, the string of packs quickly counterbalanced the anti-field, and Sonya hovered 6 meters above the ground, frantically tweaking the compensator. Controls. After a few minutes, he figured it out and came down safely. In the end, he managed to calibrate all the backpacks, then, almost ceremonially, closed the depot door, tied the loose end of the cord to his belt carabiner using another figure 8, and set off toward a part of the forest where the trees weren't too dense. The string of packs floated obediently behind him, looking like a row of balloon animals. Within the hour, he emerged into 2 clearings, the second of which was especially spacious. He found a small forest lake so stunning it could have been from a painting, spooking a flock of birds, ducks, or maybe sandpipers. At one point, he came face to snout with a family of purebred swintuses, led by a mother the size of a champion Solendan hog, only bristly and tusked. Grunting gutturally, the swintuses veered off into the underbrush, not in any particular hurry. Local wildlife didn't fear people, meaning it hadn't encountered any by nightfall. Sanya had covered around 25 kilometers. He quickly learned how to move in such a way that his long, floating tail didn't snag on bushes, trees, or otherwise get in the way. But annoyingly, he hadn't come across anything even remotely resembling decent shelter. Just forest. More and more forest, shortly. Before twilight, he came upon a ravine that at first. He had no expectations. Just a ravine, right? A long crack in Tabasco's crust, sloping down toward what was probably that same not-so-nameless river. Or another one. Didn't matter if it had a name or not. Still, any rivers near the exotic tour base were surely named by now. Sentient creatures. Just love naming rivers, mountains, lakes, and islands. If anyone had ever come across this ravine before, odds are it had a name too. Sanya needed only to figure out if anyone had actually been here. He moored the floating packs to a tree at the edge, then jumped down the steep slope. He didn't stay on his feet, slid, tumbled, and crashed into a tangle of prickly shrubs resembling Earth's blackberries or Selenan briars. He scratched his hand and cheek, cursed under his breath, then caught himself. Good thing his comms weren't live. No need for the foreman or navigator to hear him swearing over the open channel that I in the course of his battle with the hostile shrubbery. Sanya made his way almost to the bottom of the ravine. While the slopes were all reddish, loose-packed earth, the bottom surprised him by being stone. Polished smooth by unknown forces, only lightly dusted with soil sliding in from the sides. Then again, why unknown? Most likely it was water that had done the polishing, seasonal torrents draining the jungle and flowing to the river, especially after downpours. Snowmelt seemed unlikely in this climate. Pushing through the bushes, Sanya stepped on something long and solid. He assumed it was a rock, until he looked down and froze for a moment. A clip. A spent plasma clip, from a rifle or heavy two-handed Mauser. Well, Sanya muttered. So much for uninhabited wilderness. He moved deeper, where the ravine narrowed and its walls looked ready to meet. What he found next didn't surprise him at all. The ravine ended at a stone ledge, about the height of a man. At head level, a rocky overhang jutted forward, and from it a narrowing gully stretched upward. Beneath the overhang, half hidden by dense underbrush, yawned a dark tunnel that exhaled cold, damp air. This is insane, Sanya muttered. What's guiding me? Fate itself. In less than a day, I've stumbled upon a food cache and probably the only cave in these damned jungles. Or is it not the only one? Then again, there was no guarantee this cave could be turned into a proper shelter. It might not even be a real cave, just a shallow hollow. Switching his beam gun to flashlight mode, Sanya fiddled with the focus, pushed aside the thorny branches, and decisively stepped into the darkness and dampness of the cave. He might have been surprised to know that he was retracing, almost step for step, the exact path once taken by Scotch and Valti, just after the exotic tour. Base had been established on this continent. They had followed the same route from the Mangrove Bay, past a distinctive mound that would later house the supply depot, past meadows and a small lake with water ducks, straight to this very ravine. Most likely, the path was dictated by the terrain itself. In other words, it was simply the easiest way through. A quarter local hour after entering the cave, Sanya radioed the raider. Timurik? Yes, Sanya. I found shelter. And we won't have to build a thing. Someone already did it for us. Excellent. The foreman perked up. He hadn't expected such luck or such a quick solution to their most urgent problem. Encode the coordinates. Sanya packed the encrypted data into a secure file and sent it through the ether. Even the best minds of the Galacta would take considerable time to crack it, and tracking a transmitter with such low output would only be possible from a distance no greater than the current gap between the raider and the cave. It was safe to assume they had no pursuers in the immediate area. Received, Shaliko confirmed, sounding more cheerful. All right, lie low and wait. We're coming. Meanwhile, the team aboard the raider hadn't wasted a second. Supplies. and equipment had already been packed and loaded onto the lone standard all-terrain vehicle. Unfortunately, the Schuster would have to be abandoned. As captain, Takir Pluznik made sure not a shred of useful data about their discovery remained on board and gave the order to evacuate. All they could do now was hope that, after the skirmish between the Fockow fleet and the Galacta, word of the Azani ships would reach Earth, whoever the Galacta truly were, and that Earth, with all the might of the dominant, would enter the race for the priceless data that the Schuster, Epsilon 75 crew had accidentally become custodians of. By protocol, they had only reported the fact of the discovery to the search base, not its coordinates. They reached the ravine fairly quickly, but chose not to move the cargo in total darkness, nor to risk illuminating the approach to their new hideout. The night was spent cramped inside the vehicled AT First Light. They unloaded the all-terrain and hid it further down the slope in the same ravine. The thick, thorny shrubs came in very handy. The cave had indeed been used before. A neatly built fire pit near the entrance, piles of old pine boughs where tents had once stood, markings on the ground outlining tent placements, a path leading inward toward a slow-dripping spring, and a plastic canister with its top cut off, and a high-powered radio with an instant comm channel that by the time the techno-blockade was initiated, the seekers were burrowed in and lying low. The Schatzer discovered the abandoned raider later that same day, closer to evening. The strike fleet, Baguda, Zomkad system, Unwi Schatzer Empire, formerly Prong, 30, Earth dominant, void. A tiny yellowish speck in its heart, the shimmering star Zomkad. Somewhere nearby, there were also planets, but one couldn't see them with the naked eye. Next to the star, they were nothing. And yet each one was a colossal world, a living territory now held by the enemy. And each one guarded an ancient secret, a key to future victories for the rising Unwi Schatzer Empire. The fleet was under the command of Shat Ervu, not an admiral, just another servant of the Shatang Unwi, like any soldier in the fleet. Perhaps the first among servants in this sector of space. Those silly military ranks and golden epaulets were for the proud, and usually empty-headed, Galacta. The Shats valued loyalty to the Unwi and valor in battle. That, along with intellect and experience, was what set a fleet commander apart from a technician, a foot soldier, or a starship captain. The finishing spheres were swelling, one after another. The fleet spilled through the barrier, unit by unit, as warped space groaned and layers of transport nonlinearity overlaid each other, amplifying the already massive distortions of the metric. But soon, the fleet had emerged. The ships killed, off their parasitic drift, and space gradually settled back into shape. The fleet began reconfiguring into maneuver formation. And there were the Allies. Mass registrars were tracking a couple of planetary cruisers and several smaller units. Interceptor carriers, conical mine layers, floating in natural drift, waiting. Of course, they'd long since registered the arrival of the Baguda fleet. Any one of Shat Ervu's void supercruisers produced gravitational disturbances detectable from neighboring star systems. Commander Ahola on the line came. The report. A hollow column rose from the console. "Greetings, old friend," Ahola said, irking amiably. Shat Ahola and Shat Ervu had known each other a long time. Born in the same place, grew up together, studied together, enlisted together. Eventually, of course, the stars had scattered them. Senior ranks didn't stick around in pairs for long. Hey, warrior," Ervu replied, and couldn't resist a jab. "So how did your heroes manage to let a homo searcher slip through their fingers?" Eukola scratched his shoulder joint irritably. "Not that we completely botched it. But think about it. How do civilians behave under attack? They don't even try to run, just freeze up, disoriented. But those guys, they dropped straight through the barrier and straight into a head-on. No wonder they missed the interceptors, didn't even have time to squeal. My squad looped around, and those bastards, if they had any brains, should have headed planetward. The atmosphere's their edge. We might have caught them, but, damn it, Just then the planetary cruiser was docking. The homos slipped right past, and the interceptors nearly dove into nonlinearity. While they were trying to maneuver, the homos had already made it into the atmosphere. Try catching up with that, yeah. Bad luck, my friend. It happens. Urvu offered genuine sympathy. And the worst part, it was so fast. Whoosh, and the homos were gone. Shatukola grumbled on. Just a trail of plasma and a memory. I made the pilots scrub latrines in the brig. Unwee's direct. Order. Fat lot of good that did. All right, it's done. Urvu waved a hand. Time to fix it. Let's. His colleague straightened in his chair with readiness. What forces do you have? 2 planetaries, 2 carrier frigates, 5 shield ships, and 8 light cruisers with drop troops. Not much, Urvu sighed. But not a problem. I brought reinforcements. You have planetary data? What's it called again? It doesn't have a name in our tongue. The homos call it Tabasca. I've already pulled the data. Show me. Before Urvu, a hollow cube unfolded, displaying the bluish-green orb of Tabasca in the center, with pictogram-laced annotations scrolling along the edges. For a time, the two shats studied the information, planetographic data, layout of human stations and outposts, potential landing zones, primary vectors for troop deployment. The Homo Scout ship had landed on the largest of 14 continents in the northern hemisphere. Like all of Tabasca's land masses, it was untouched wilderness, blanketed with jungles and swamps. A shabby livestock farm clung to the subpolar coast, alongside a plankton harvesting complex. Nearby was a laughably small spaceport, enough for 2 or 3 small freighters at best. In the southern part of the continent, some sort of tourist outpost operated under the name Exotic Tour. They had their own spaceport, slightly more respectable, though still barely above a sneeze-sized hauler. Urvu habitually began plotting the attack vectors. All right then, colleague. First things first, this continent. 2 planetaries, cover both launch pads. Nothing gets off the ground. 1 planetary hits the science station. Don't forget to deploy the info blockade. Scientists always have an arsenal of comm gear and high-tech junk. Second cruiser, take the southern spaceport. The 3D model of Tabasca bloomed with arrows and tactical markers. 6 satellites to stationary orbits, overlap coverage. Seed the bioregistrars. Homo variability. How strong is it? Not extreme. But there are 4 distinct genetic branches in their species, plus a mix of everything else in unpredictable ratios. Adjust for that. Every registrar, tuned. Not like last time. Shatukola gave a knowing grunt. The events Urvu alluded to weren't pleasant memories. But past mistakes were best remembered. Easier to avoid them next time. Next, drops. I figure only 4 objectives are worth holding. The science station, mining complex, plankton plant, and the tourist port. It's way too solid for a place like this. All other targets, abduction style, land, sweep, purge, leave. And don't forget the beacons. What troops do you have? Gray skeletons. Oh ho. Shat Urva brightened. Unwee's guard. The very same. Nice. I've got the marked core. Also not bad. Ukola nodded with approval and gave a meaningful creak of his exoskeleton. Where do they go? Grays, for securing objectives. Marked, for sweeps. Seems logical. Agreed. Looks like that covers the basics, friend. Then let's begin. Let's begin. Model to command grid. Shat Urvu ordered the techs, casting a final glance at Tabasca, now locked in the pincers of red targeting vectors. Preliminary readiness confirmed. The fleet began its methodical realignment, targeting the second planet. The yellowish sphere of Zankad looked on with cold indifference as the invasion began. Exotic Tour Prong, 32, Tabasco, Earth Dominion. When the group was out on a route, the staff of the tour base and the spaceport had almost nothing to do. Half the girls flew off to visit their husbands, mostly up at the northern plankton fishing complex. The cargo handlers from the terminals headed to the islands to fish. A trio of cosmodrome workers spent the first day after the liner's departure playing bridge and preference in turns, the second day sleeping it off, the third drinking beer, and the fourth sleeping again. The buffet attendant, Lucy, managed to do 2 pencil sketches from life during breaks between serving beer to the spaceport guys, and immediately sold them through the network to an Irish pub in Azure Whisper. The semi-domesticated Koshkun near the canteen turned out to be female and gave birth to 5 amusing striped kittens in the bushes near the gazebos that a fairly bright bolide had been spotted in the daytime sky, crashing somewhere in the vicinity of the Syra River and the Mangrove Bay. However, the Cosmodrome instruments hadn't registered any significant ground-level shockwave, and that summed up all the news of the first 10-day cycle. A typical sleepy 3 to 4 week wait until Scotch brought the tired, shaggy, and endlessly satisfied tourists back to the base SO. When an unexpected call came in from the Faucault University Research Station, it went unanswered for quite a while. There simply wasn't anyone near the communications hub, since personal calls were routed directly to wrist comms. The call was finally heard by Masami Tamura, a small, sturdy dispatcher passing by the admin cottage. He was on his way to grab another dozen beers from Lucy at the buffet. Hearing the ring, Tamura looked around for a moment, trying to figure out where the familiar sound was coming from. Once he realized it, and since no one else was around, he figured he might as well answer. Inside the cottage, he dropped into a chair in front of the terminal and tapped the appropriate sensor. A curly-haired, bleary-eyed figure of indeterminate age materialized in the video cube. "Hey," the curly one greeted. "I'm a physicist from the Faucault Uni Station. Name's Lyosha." "Good afternoon," Tamura replied politely, simulating a bow without standing up. "Tamura, dispatcher of the Tour Base Spaceport." "Spaceport?" The curly-haired man blinked. "I thought I was calling the Tour Base." "This is the Tour Base," Tamura explained patiently. "I'm just not on shift right now." "Oh," the physicist, Lyosha, finally got it. "All right. So, have you looked at the sky recently?" "Probably about a week and a half ago, when the liner took off." "Why? You asking about the bolide or something?" Tamura guessed. "Bolide?" Lyosha didn't follow. "No, not the bolide. Some weird stuff's going on. First off, there's no external comms, only local, across Tabasco. And second, are you aware of what's going on above Tabasco right now?" "What is going on above Tabasco?" "There are ships. A lot of ships. Looks like military. I'm not an expert, and we don't have a military ship database here at the station. We don't have that kind of information either." Tamura shrugged. "So what about the ships?" "I was wondering," Lyosha mused. "Maybe they're the reason long-range comms are down?" "Could be," Tamura said, not particularly alarmed. The tense silence lingered for a few seconds. "Well," the physicist sighed, "if anything happens, could you warn us, okay?" "What could happen?" Tamura asked, puzzled. "I don't know, just in case, you know. Ships and all. What's his deal with these ships?" Tamura thought irritably. "I've been dealing with ships all my life. Receiving, dispatching, rerouting, and nothing ever happens." "All right. We'll warn you," he promised aloud. "Thanks. Goodbye. Take care." Tamura waved casually. After stocking up on beer, he detoured to the gazebos and fed the Koshkun mother some fish heads, then headed back to join his friends in finishing their card game. On the cottage porch, he glanced toward the distant horizon above the Cosmodrome field. Something faint and swirly was brewing at the edge of visibility. "Storm coming, maybe?" Tamura muttered, squinting his already narrow eyes. "Better tell the girls to warn Scotch." He went inside, dumped the beer on the table, and said, "I'll be right back. Going to see Verka. Something's brewing on the horizon. Might be a storm." Verka worked as the tour base's dispatcher. To avoid sitting in the admin cottage all the time, she had redirected guide and rescue comms to her home terminal. The terminal in the cottage was notoriously moody, and Tamura didn't know Verka's personal number. Too lazy to ask his friends, and wanting to stretch his legs after sitting through a long card game, he figured the beer run had been too short of a walk anyway. That he grabbed a can from the stack, popped it open, took a sip, and stepped outside. Dispatcher. Verka was soaking in the bath, so Tamura had to talk to her through the closed door. Hey. Tamura called and knocked.